Welcome back to Theology for the Unwanted. I'm your host, Dan Tilson, and across from me, my trusty sidekick, John Byram. What's up?
What is up?
Happy Easter, man.
Lent is finally over.
We made it.
Here. We made it.
We made it.
It wasn't a leap year, so it wasn't 41 days.
That's a good callback to the last episode.
Right.
Yeah. How was your Easter? How is it going?
It was good. I didn't do Vigil this year, which I was a little upset about. But Easter Sunday was great. Had a great time at Mass. Had a great time at brunch afterwards. Bottomless mimosas. But, we don't celebrate Easter that way. I do. But it's all good. It was a good time. How was yours?
Great, man. We fed 150 people in my little parish, and we had 500 people show up.
It's a tiny parish.
And I was feeling so blessed until I remembered that I am the barista that has to make coffee.
I remember your Instagram story. You were dreading having to make that much coffee.
I was drenched in sweat afterwards because it was a very, very scary hour after Mass. But anyway, that makes up for whatever penance that I forgot. Okay, before we go any further, John, you and I talked about how we're not so fun. We're not as fun as we'd like to be. All right?
We try.
So we decided we need to bring in a couple people to spice this up. So we have two fantastic guests joining us today. We have Meg and Nicole. Say hello.
Howdy.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. So I'll pass this to you guys in just a second, but let me do a quick introduction. Meg, you are the first and only guest on this podcast, I'm saying that for future reference, that has any sort of degree in baking pastries. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is pretty cool.
The universe.
And we are definitely going to find an excuse to invite you over to the recording studio sometime so we can do like a taste test episode.
After Lent.
Yes, after Lent. And Nicole, you also have a pretty interesting background. You have traveled all throughout the world, and I was very excited to hear that you speak Spanish, a little bit of French, and you can swear in Dutch.
Yeah.
So thank you both so much for being here. Meg, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is that you all are working on?
So Nicole and I run a podcast called Catholic Not Fascist.
Bold title.
It is a bold title, but it is one where we are actually extending an olive branch and welcoming a lot of people back to the church who might perceive the church in a different light.
I actually get the comment often on social media that people really like our name or that they're like, oh, it's nice to see that. So it can come off, I think, to some people as a little bit like confrontational, but I think for the people that we want it to, it's coming off as more of an invitation.
Definitely. Yeah. I've listened to a number of your episodes and I was very impressed. As I told John, I was like, you wouldn't know from the title, but it's almost like middle ground. They want to bring people together to have dialogue and figure this out.
So sometimes you need that wow factor. Remember, like in school, like they're talking about your opening paragraph needs to have that thing, that attention grabber, something like that.
And here we are. So we're really glad you're here today. Obviously, as we've mentioned before with guests on Theology for the Unwanted, that we bring folks onto the show because they have an important POV. That's not to say that they need to agree with us or we agree with them, but that they have something that we think all the listeners will find really, really worthwhile. Also want to mention, because some of them have a background in social work and other mental health issues, that anything you hear today, if these topics come up, you should always consult a professional. We're kind of spitballing and having conversations here as it relates to the church, but nothing on here is professional advice. Is that right?
That's correct. If you are in crisis, please go to your local emergency department and/or call 988.
I love that. And John, actually, this is an issue that you have been very, very passionate about for many years now.
Yeah. With the federal government finally passing the bill that has been fought for so long, the establishment of 988, which is the mental health emergency hotline and crisis hotline, I think it's absolutely fantastic. It is something that when it passed, like I was happy it passed, but at the same time, I was like, why in the world did it take this long? And just being the person I am, it's like I'm thinking about like all the lives that could have been saved if this passed years and years ago when it was first brought up. But going forward, super happy about it, but 100%, 988 is a great resource to use.
Definitely. Thank you, John. So before we dive into the topic, where This week, we are going to tap into the very international experience of our guests, their lived experience both in and out of the Catholic Church, trying to see how things are done differently. We are going to look at the trend of Gen Z taking a hard right turn toward traditionalism and conservatism. We're going to compare that with Gen X, and then John and I are going to talk about how, as millennials, we are the bridge holding all the weight these days. Is that right?
I'm tired of being the bridge, man.
I wanted to ask you all something because we all come from slightly different areas. Where I grew up in the Catholic Church on Easter Sunday, there's this reading from the Gospel of John where we find out that Peter was second to the tomb. So John races him. John's younger. He gets there first, and Peter arrives second. And at every opportunity where I grew up, the priest has always made the point that this is proof that Peter was the first pope. Have you guys heard this story before?
I've never.
Okay. John, have you heard this at all?
It sounds vaguely familiar.
From our days in college?
From our time at CCM at George Mason.
Yeah. I'm relieved to hear you guys say that because until yesterday morning, I had always thought that this was considered proof that Peter was the first pope, that he was second to the tomb, but that everyone waited till he arrived to get in. Because the priest would always say, either there's only two options. Either the author of the Gospel of John wanted you to know that he was faster and younger, or Peter is the pope. And I just took that for granted. I was like, yeah, it's definitely one of those two options.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until
Definitely the first option. Definitely the first option.
I mean, I was thinking about this in the car ride yesterday, and I was like, wait, I've been at restaurants before where somebody got their food before me and they just waited for me. I'm not important. So
you are important, Dan. Do not sell yourself short.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. But we had two different scholars who were priests. We had two different priests who were scholars give the homilies at our masses yesterday morning on Easter Sunday. And both of them spent at least 5 minutes each on the whole concept of John being faster than Peter. And at no point did they have any way of tying this back to the papacy. And that's when it occurred to me that once again, I fell for some legal traps here in Northern Virginia growing up.
That doesn't happen here. What are you talking about?
No, definitely not. And this is something that the priest that was giving the homily yesterday, he definitely, he would talk about something like that. He's very, he loves history. He loves talking about history. So he would have, I don't know, it would have been his jam, I feel like. But yeah, he did not talk about that.
And I'm just shocked that I never heard a nun in my life, because I had nuns teach me from elementary school all the way through. That had never been one of the suggestions.
This may not be a surprise to you, John, but sometimes I feel like the theology that I grew up with is a little bit different than what the Catholic Church teaches.
Yeah, I've mentioned it before on past episodes, like when I converted here in the diocese and then I went to Chicago. Chicago was like a whole different Catholic church than where I converted. And honestly, that's what really helped open my eyes to some of the pros and cons to our home diocese. But yeah, it was definitely eye-opening, and there were a lot of things that I learned because of experiencing other dioceses. So.
Yeah. So, John, you've grown up with the church. Well, I guess you weren't yet Catholic, but you grew up in South Korea, and you've lived where else? Not all 8 places.
Right. No, so South Korea was the main one, but all over the U.S. also, again, coming from a military family. So places like Rhode Island, South Carolina, and stuff like that.
So you've been able to kind of compare the practices of the church and kind of the flavors of Catholicism in the different places. Nicole, can you tell us, so you've lived in quite a few countries, right?
Yeah, I'm originally from Canada, and in the United States, I've kind of lived all over the place. In my childhood, primarily Arizona and Maine. And then I've also lived in Bolivia and Peru as well. And I spent 6 weeks in Holland. So I've been to church there too. When I was 13.
I love that. But your family is, or at least you have some family that's Dutch. So it's a little different than like a study abroad for a semester.
Yeah. No, I was staying with family. Like that's why I went to Holland, was to see my mom is from Holland, so I went to go see, and she will call it Holland. I'm sorry if you're a person that refers to it as the Netherlands, which is more correct, but that's just what I grew up with. But I went there when I was 13 to visit family. They sent all of us, so I have a brother and a sister. They sent all of us once because expensive, right, to
Yeah.
fly. Especially my brother and sister flew out of British Columbia. I flew out of Arizona. So, you're
Huh.
passing over a continent before an ocean. So,
Yes.
yeah. But yeah, it was so my mom is Dutch. My dad's parents are Dutch. So that is why all I know how to do in Dutch is swear. No, I can also say I love you in Dutch, but I don't
Just
speak
for
it
balance,
fluently.
right? Just for
Just for
balance.
Yeah, I mean, so yes. I do think I learned a lot of the swear words before I learned how to say I love you. So I don't know if that reflects badly on me or my mom, but
It's culture. It's culture.
it's culture. Yeah.
It was the same way with me in Korean. I learned the swear words before I learned anything else.
Oh
So
my
it was-
gosh. Well, I definitely learned a couple of swear words from my priest. I go to an Italian speaking parish, and I know that those things were said in the sacristy quite a bit. So, and then Meg, you similarly have lived, what did we say, 39 places? Is that right? 40
That's right.
places?
39.
39. So you spent a lot of time in the southern United States. However,
Yeah.
you've also lived internationally.
I've lived in Spain, Chile. I've lived in California, Oregon, Tennessee, Kentucky are really my main bases. Just so y'all know, I'm half Appalachian. Okay, like represent.
I love
Um,
it.
so I've lived in Georgia. I've lived in Chicago. But I've pretty much ping ponged around all those places.
I love it.
You've lived abroad though too, right?
I said Spain and
Oh, you
Chile.
did. Okay, sorry. ADHD.
No, I'm glad, Meg, that you live in Spain because all of us here before we started recording this podcast, we read an article from La Civiltà Cattolica. It is a Vatican edited journal. And so that was kind of the basis for us trying to understand what is the Vatican thinking in terms of Gen Z. And the author is from Spain. And a lot of the things that he said when John and I were talking earlier, he was like, I don't know if what he's seeing is what I'm seeing. And I was like, well, I think the dude's from the south of Spain. So there is a little bit of a difference and would love for you to kind of be like, hey, this is what I saw when I lived there. Now, you guys you may know this. The Pope, whenever he speaks, does his absolute best not to accidentally change church teaching. Not to accidentally do it, right? Sometimes it's on purpose. And one of the ways that the church figured out that the Pope can't just give off the cuff remarks was when the concept of human dignity and democracies were really starting to become commonplace in the 1800s. They were like, ooh, we really need to have another avenue to think out loud. And so the journal, La Civiltà Cattolica, was founded. There's a couple other places that when the Vatican wants to test messaging, they do it in that magazine. They also do it in Avvenire, which is a daily news site that is owned by the Italian Catholic bishops, but that's considered a little less formal. So right off the bat, we can tell that this article that we read talking about what Gen Z and Gen X are doing to the church, it means that the Holy Father himself is thinking about this. Doesn't mean that he's getting ready to write an encyclical, but he's thinking about it. And therefore, I think the bishops around the world should be thinking about it too. So, John, let me start with you real quick. What are some of your reactions or observations about this up and coming generation, Gen Z, and how they feel about the church?
So Gen Z is a very dynamic generation when it comes to faith. I feel like from what we're seeing here in America, at least, there is a strong calling of Gen Z back to religion, like millennials and probably some of the younger Gen X had a little bit of, we've always heard the term is like I'm religious, but like I believe in God, but I'm not religious. I don't affiliate with organized religion. Like I believe in God, but
Right.
I feel like that's starting to go away again, where now Gen Z is starting to come back to the church. They are saying they are religious, and there's a big conversion towards Catholicism. There's a great article about a religious class for converts up in New York this Easter visual that did this just passed one, the church had 88 people convert to the faith on Easter Vigil, and that was the largest class in decades.
Mhm.
And it was mainly Gen Z. So we're starting to see that swing of, and this article touches on it, that cycle of moving back towards the idea of traditional values in religion, bringing the younger generation back into the religious fold.
Meg or Nicole, let's talk about what are your reactions as to why the author of this article thought or thinks that people left the faith over the last 20, 30 years?
Can I ask a question? Is this author a boomer?
Okay, so we took a poll beforehand and we were super split as to whether or not this author knew what he was talking about. The thing that concerns me right immediately is that this author is clearly reflecting what the Pope is thinking about privately. And I want our Holy Father to have really good advice. So maybe, Meg, in that case, what advice would you give to this author?
What advice would I give to this author? It would be to keep the question of how do we bridge the generations and completely rewrite the entire narrative.
Oh my gosh. Well, Nicole, you mentioned he missed the mark in, like, he obviously said there's this desire for community and there's this desire to find places where people can meet their future spouse. And you were like, well, there's a couple things that he forgot to mention, maybe conveniently.
So when we're talking about like why people left the church, he seems to think that we left because of like the power of like secularization and maybe because we were bored at church. Like that's what I got from it. But I think that he really doesn't think about, or he doesn't bring up the fact that many people left the church for a lot more profound reasons. Like perhaps they had an LGBTQI identity and didn't feel safe in the church, or they were friends with somebody who was, or their siblings or things like that. So I remember reading about like Anne Hathaway used to be like super Catholic, even considered becoming a nun, but her brother is gay and she didn't feel like she could stay in a church that supported. So not that I'm like huge on celebrity news, but that story has always stuck with me because I think it's really poignant to our generation that a lot of us left for really good reasons. Like I grew up in a very like conservative Catholic home and I left for a while. I never completely stopped going to church because I got to go with my parents and stuff. But I left because I didn't agree with the way the church was treating certain populations. And I don't think that that's addressed.
Which populations?
LGBTQI populations is obviously a big one.
First.
People that are divorced.
Single parents.
Single parents. People. Women.
So I guess I would say we did a Synod survey here in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area in 2021, and basically asking people, like, what do you believe? What do you not believe about what the church says? How are you being treated? Who's missing? And what surprised me was they said there was such an emphasis on family, such an emphasis on like kind of the pro-life elements of the church, that we had a lot of people who never got married who are like, I'm kind of aging out of the youth group or of the young adults group, and I just feel invisible. And that was a really important thing to be brought up because we have quite a few people, for one reason or another, are not currently married or they got married and it didn't work out, and we just kind of make them invisible, you know? John, what did you think?
I mean, getting married in this economy? Are you kidding me? I think Nicole hit it on the head here when it comes to secularism. I feel like that's the default argument that the church has for anything bad happening in the church. It's secularism. It's influence of Hollywood. It's the influence of glam or fashion or whatever is not strictly identified as Catholic. So it's, for me, that's an umbrella term that I feel like the church needs to stop using because I think it's just too generic, right? I mean, Nicole, you mentioned it's people leaving because, you know, the church's handling of single parents in churches, LGBTQ members of the church, and the church's handling of people. There are bigger issues within the church that deserve that attention and not just be lumped under some umbrella term like secularism and then just say, oh, everything outside the church bad, everything inside the church good.
Jon, I just want to dance on the rooftops because you just said that. Because it's like a scapegoat, right? Like, oh, Hollywood scapegoat, And I have always felt like there's a part of the church that for some reason it's like they want to throw the blame over there, when I'm like, we are here in the church as your parishioners, begging you for connection, begging for connection with one another. And yet, where is the support? Where is the love? And like, it really ended up feeling like the church itself. And when I say the church itself, I'm talking about in every single place I ever lived. It was a check mark on your list. Show up on Sunday, leave.
Yeah, and I think what we're being told, at least about Gen Z, not just from this article, but even the Washington Post this past week covered that 22-year-old Catholic influencer in New York City. By the way, I want to point out that this guy does not like wearing a shirt. I mean, he really wants to make sure you know that he has an 8-pack. And that is how he is bringing you to Christ. But it's kind of making the point that the new generation desires traditionalism. My question would be, but why? For what purpose? What is good about that if it is true that the young generation wants more tradition? And what might be missing the mark?
So one thing that like I did agree with the article on is like this idea that like beauty is really important to Gen Z. And I don't actually disagree with that because I really like the beauty of the church. This is something where I felt like I identify with Gen Z on this. Like recently, me and Meg were in the St. Louis Cathedral, which if you ever get the chance to go, it is absolutely
stunning,
breathtakingly gorgeous. And I was almost in tears at the mass there. And so I do think beauty is really highly, highly important for Gen Z. And I think part of the other factors coming into this are, Meg has mentioned this before, the pandemic is right. Like people typically return to church after pandemics. I think also the political turmoil we're in right now, people are seeking kind of stability. So I think that is, no matter what side you're on, I think that coming back to church is a thing. And I do think a lot of the people returning to church have been more on the conservative side, and I could get into that. But I've also seen recently, like a lot of people being like, oh, I'm a lapsed Catholic, but Pope Leo is really pulling me back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My reaction when I see someone that's super traditional on social media, it's a little bit of fear at first because I feel so hurt by some of those individuals. And keep in mind, I was in that Latin Mass crowd. So I was part of it. I was part of the problem. And at the same time, I love the Latin Mass. And so when I see somebody that looks like I did 15 years ago, I immediately have this instinct where I want to like pull an arrow out of the quiver, right? Is that the right word?
Quiver?
Quiver? I don't know. Sorry, we're going to look that up later and cut it if we have to.
It is. As somebody who reads a lot of fantasy novels, it is
Yeah.
quiver.
I thought it was a cure, but I didn't know it was actually quiver.
I almost said
That's
scabbard, but that wasn't it.
Do you guys know what the quiverful movement is?
No, do tell.
It's a Christian extremist movement. Like the Duggars are part of it. So the idea is that you have a bunch of children to like replenish the kingdom of God.
Oh my goodness.
Quiver is full of your children. This is a real thing. You can look it up.
We're gonna set that idea down.
Yeah.
But no, like my reaction when I see someone that looks like me from 15 years ago is that I kind of want to like fire an arrow at them. But what's been really interesting as of late is I have found so many of these Latin Mass folks are also like, oh yeah, but we love the gays. And so tradition's coming back, but it's a little different, I think. Meg, what do you think?
I want to add to this. I was trying to talk to Nicole about this prior to us meeting. And this is something that in the article, I just don't agree with whatsoever. But remember, I was raised in an elementary school, middle school, high school in a Catholic church. I literally traveled across Europe singing in cathedrals with my choir. And what I will tell you is there's not a day in my entire memory. And even with my godmother, my grandmother, she's like in her 80s, mid 80s. Catholic beauty has always been a thing. And to discredit that, like, I don't know why that would be specific or unique to Gen Z. It's all of us. It's part of, beauty comes from God. And I was always taught that, like from the time I was wee, like little bitty to an adult. So that's another part of this article where I'm like, what?
But did you always have those quote unquote traditional looking parishes, or were they more like, warehouses? What was it like?
No. So like I was raised in a basilica, the majority of, so I mean, there you go. And, that basilica had a history of even being like, being tied to there was an underground railroad that went underneath that basilica. So I'm really tied to that church from my childhood. And so, just tons of history in the church that I was baptized and confirmed in. Just funny because I bounced around a lot in between there. But I just wanted to say that, like, I love a Latin Mass. Personally, I think they are drop dead gorgeous. And I have a lot of appreciation for them. Even when you talk about veiling, if I may mention that today, I think it really depends on, like, well, what is your definition of this? Me and my aunt just talked about this over Easter, so this is kind of fun. But, like, there are people that veil because they see it as, like, a woman is life. And so you're veiling life, just like when you veil the Eucharist, or when you cover the Eucharist. And I was like, that is a definition your girl can get down with. But both my aunt and I, we don't veil because her and I feel very similar that for so long, we feel like it was to symbolize us being less than. And so that is why, and so I'm all about freedom of choice. And however you come to that is your decision, but it is not anyone's job to put upon someone else. Yes or no?
I would love advice from both of you, Megan and Nicole, because you are correct that traditionally the veil it wasn't meant to symbolize, it was meant to remind. In canon law, it says that the woman is subject to the man. And it said that for centuries. And it said because of that, she ought to veil during Mass. Now, in the final 2 or 3 centuries of women having to veil at Mass, even though that was still on the books, nobody was using that, right? It's kind of like, the earth being flat. Like, we didn't officially change that in the way we would speak about things until centuries after people totally stopped believing it. But when I see someone veiling at Mass now, obviously it means something different to them. So I don't know that I want to look at someone who's choosing to veil and be like, oh, they think that they're subject to men. Clearly not. But help me struggle with that. Is it beautiful? Is it misplaced? Is it something that should come back?
What
I
did
mean,
you
it
say,
is
Meg?
beautiful. Your girl loves lace. I mean, it is beautiful.
So I have a friend that veils, and she says that it helps her focus on God because there's literally something around her. So it's kind of a visual cue for her. So that's one perspective. I've thought about veiling before, but I do actually think that my draw to veiling is the aesthetics of it. I think it's very pretty. But now, especially kind of with the rise of trad wives and stuff like that, when I see somebody in a veil, I do wonder, what it makes me think that they might tend towards a more conservative version
Are you a
of
Tobit
God.
wife?
Yeah, but like I just said, I have a friend who's definitely not that. So, and I
There's
had
a
friends in
spectrum.
college that veiled too, and they are definitely not that. So that's interesting. And also, I'm part of a chat group of Catholics who are very progressive, and some of whom are LGBTQI, who also veil. So I definitely think it runs the spectrum.
The only thing I was going to add to that was, I mean, when I converted in college, which was a very interesting time to convert. And I had to get a lot of Protestant ideas out of my head. And one of the things was the idea of veiling. And I had to pretty much retrain myself because to me, and maybe it was just because of the Catholic bubble that I converted in, not at my university, but where I live here in the DC area. To me, when I was converting, the veil was worn for the wrong reasons. They were wearing it to show their piety, to show how religiously devoted they were.
Mhm.
But as soon as they left the church, they were a completely different person. And that is kind of what started to sour me a little bit on some of those more traditional elements of the church. Like I went to Latin Mass a few times. It's not for me. I can't do it. It's not my cup of tea. But I love the idea behind the veil. I like the symbology behind it. Like, having, I love that Eucharist comparison you made, Meg. I think that was absolutely beautiful. But in the back of my mind, I always start to wonder if someone's doing something, whether it's wearing a veil or staying 30 minutes after mass is ended. I have to turn that voice off in the back of my head saying, why are they doing this? Like, are they doing this to prove something? And I think that's just a product of the area I converted in. So I totally get that. I do think it looks great. I think people who rock the veil, I think, obviously I'm not going to wear something if it doesn't look good on me. So, I mean, I totally get that. But the other thing I want to touch on real quick, Dan, you mentioned it, and it has to do with the influencer in New York you talked about. Like, you made the joke about the guy having an 8-pack, but this is actually a connection to something that happened in the 19th century called Muscular Christianity.
This is new to me.
Yeah.
No,
So
I've
Muscular
heard of this before.
Christianity is the theology that obviously your body is a temple. So you need to make sure your body is in shape for God. There was a lot of militaristic terms that were used in Muscular Christianity, which is why for some reason around 1945 people stopped using it. I'll let people fill in the blanks there, but it was something that was quickly phased out in the mid 20th century. But with anyone who pays attention to what Gen Z and Gen Alpha is currently doing when it comes to things like, I'm going to throw terms out there that I discovered a couple months ago. Compliments. Shout out to my niece and nephew who keep me young with some of this terminology.
Is it 6'7"?
It's not, but everyone in my office knows that, and it's great and it's horrific at the same time. But no, it's the whole thing with like looks maxing, this whole manosphere movement of like this toxic masculinity, where some of those more traditional, rad trad wife kind of like ideas we're going from.
Mhm.
That's highly connected with a male being physically fit and physically healthy, which is eerily connected with muscular Christianity. So it's this idea of, returning to traditional values, and it's linking all back. I don't think they actually know they're doing this, but it's a very close link back to muscular Christianity, which was used to raise armies and take over countries. So there is a very dark tie to that. There are very, very close similarities to that. So homeboy with the 8-pack in New York he may not realize he's doing that, but he's linking the two.
It's honestly shocking that he's not trying to get a gay audience. Like when I watch these Catholic videos that, a reporter asked me,
but maybe succeeding. Sorry.
A reporter actually asked me this morning, almost alarmed, like, what do we do about this? And I want to take the conversation towards theology and wrestling with this in just a minute, because the church would look at this and say, okay, there's a lot that's good, and there's a lot that's maybe like not fully there. So let's wrestle with that. But Meg, did you have any thoughts on this?
Number one, I just agree with everything Jon just said. I agree with all of that. I think we've very much witnessed that. And I think when we think about piety, we're also just talking about this obsession with like what we look like and what we appear like in public, right? And that actually might tie us back to someone. This article talks about not just Gen Z, but it talks about Gen X, right? And so 30 minutes after mass, to me, that's like, again, that you're talking about something that I grew up with that's totally normal. You pray the rosary. And to me, that's not unique to Gen Z. I've been praying. The rosary has been my anxiety treatment since I was born. Like, I don't know how that is particularly unique, but this generation that has been constantly under surveillance from the time they were born, pictures of them as children put on the internet without their permission, having that to look back to their entire lives, right? No wonder this is their fixation and their source of anxiety. It's because they have the biggest fear of being ghosted, of being canceled, of being left behind. And we, the church, need to be responsible for saying, let's put all that away, because this is about real connection. This isn't about appearances. Faith is deeper than anything out there on a screen. And you don't even need to take a picture to prove that you went to church today, homie. Like, you just gotta build, be there, be connected. That's what it's really about. And we're losing sight of that a little bit.
The relational element you brought up is really important because all virtues are inherently relational. I think a big mistake that we've made in English speaking Catholicism is teaching virtues as if they're habits that, like, if you white knuckle through it and you're disciplined enough that you'll just be virtuous. You cannot be virtuous on your own. You can avoid sin on your own, but it's really hard to build virtue unless you are working towards unity and working towards encountering others rather than possessing or owning them. And I agree, Meg, that Gen Z and Gen Alpha and whoever is coming after them now,
Beta.
okay, I don't like that term.
That's where it's going.
Yeah,
You like alpha though, Dan? Interesting.
Well, no, just I don't know. I had
Dude, you just wait till Generation Omega shows up.
hold on. What were those colorful fish that you could get for like $2? It was like the beta something.
Oh yeah.
Beta fish.
Literally beta fish. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? They were not able to build relationships with one another in the tank. And so they were always trying to eat one another.
You didn't. Did you put two beta fishes together?
I now know that I should not have. Okay.
Dan can't say that no animals were harmed.
We're gonna add to our disclaimers at the end of the episode. No, but you made an important point about relationships and Gen Z being skeptical of what's going on. So I want to call us back to what we did in a couple episodes ago with Jean-Luc Marion. And he presented two concepts of tradition. One is an idol, the other is an icon. Obviously, the icon, it's the positive Christian imagery here. An icon is something that gazes at you. So, Nicole, as you said, your friend that puts the veil over her head and it helps her stay focused. In that sense, theologically, we would say, okay, it's opening her up to something beyond herself. So right there, if she said that, if that's the vocab she uses, you're like, something there is definitely good. With the idol, believe it or not, the Catholic faith and even truth can be an idol. It can be an idol if we're using faith to kind of like put a box around things, lock things tight, because then it's doing nothing more than reflecting what we're capable of understanding on our own. So, Nicole, I'll start with you. If we're looking at what's going on with the shift of all the generations, what elements are you seeing that is a little bit more idol and what's a little bit more icon?
For Gen Z, and this is something that's brought up in the article too, he talks about how there's like this focus on faith without works, which this is definitely somewhere where I highly diverge. I've worked in nonprofits. I have worked in like a regular human job. I was a stockbroker for a little bit. And I hated it because I really felt like my life should be directed to something more meaningful. So it does concern me a little bit that you have this like obsession with Gen Z, and you see it on the social medias, right? Like people have talked about how social media is also pushing this conversion to Catholicism, which is great. But like, and you see girls talking about like veiling and stuff like that. And sometimes it does seem a bit performative, right? And that to me is highly concerning, right? Because I mean, the Bible tells us that faith without works is dead, right? So we need to make sure that that's in there. One of the things that I do think is more like icon is that people are coming back into the faith because they are seeking connection.
Yeah.
And I think that that's hugely important. And I do think that the church here in the US, as you were saying, like we've been told to white knuckle it for a long time. I'm going to plug your book here a little bit, but I was reading your book earlier today.
How much did you pay her?
I didn't. This is a shock. Wait. We don't know if this is a negative book review coming up. Go ahead.
In fact, I did pay for this book. So that you say that we need to allow ourselves to be transformed by that love rather than trying to discipline our way to holiness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's hugely influential. And so, but I think that we have this like tendency towards Protestantism within the Catholic Church here in the United States. And so like John talking about like the muscle Christians, that was a Protestant thing, right?
I
like
didn't pay her to say that, by the way.
It's so true. But we were actually Puritan culture is really like we were talking about like there's this like Puritan culture from like, way back in the day when we were like, dealing with,
witches in big quotations. But that is very much the energy of the United States. So, like this article that we're reading, I want to just be really clear that this is, a Spanish, from my understanding, Spanish author.
Yes.
And, it's very much from my understanding, reflecting on that. But it in no way is like applicable internationally. I don't think at all.
He kind of has like a rosy picture, right? It's kind of like, things are okay, but, we just kind of have to find a way to get the two generations together. Is that how you see it?
Totally wrong. Like, it's just wrong. It's taking no historical context about what's happening around these people as we're living life. And, like, let me give you an example. May I quote it?
Yeah, please.
In the 1980s, youth were typically seen as rebellious progressives challenging a conservative hierarchy. How ironic that they chose the one and only generation where women had actual freedom and human dignity, autonomy, to then pick on this generation that, for the first time ever, got to experience safety and what it was like to not be property. And by the way, that was happening internationally. You want to talk about human rights movements, homie, I am connected to them in Chile, Spain, you name it. I am connected now, Canada. Thanks, Nicole. And, so, we are a lot more united. And so it gives no honor to what is actually happening in the world. And instead, it's saying, oh, it's Hollywood, when it's they're not taking anything into context. Let me see if I can quote myself here. Yeah, and by the way, it doesn't shock me that a male majority takes no moment of thought about that shift in time. Suddenly, it's progressive and it's bad. Suddenly, it's progressive and it's bad. When Gen X, they were our homies. They were our first fighters for LGBTQ rights loudly. They were the first fighters for love is love. They taught my generation, Gen Y, that love is love. And we took it home, dude. We took it home. And the church wasn't willing to hold our hand through that walk.
There is a older priest that told me when he had first gotten ordained that there was a prohibition on new priests hearing women's confessions for 3 years. And at least as he understood it, it was to help him prevent from getting, like, I don't know, aroused or tempted or whatever. That was kind of like the reasoning, right? Everything I just said is very old school. This dude was quite old. But even in hearing his description, I don't think I heard him ever tell me the church was trying to take into consideration what was best for the ladies in the parish, right? So can you help us understand what might the church be missing about the difficulty of telling your sins to a priest?
So I do go to confession, probably not as much as I should, but I do go to confession. But I find it hard sometimes because, like most people, I have had sexual sins come up. And that is something I find supremely awkward to talk to a priest with. One time I was confessing something and they were like, well, how many times? And I was like, I don't count, sir. But
I don't count, sir.
But and then there's also things that, if you're getting into a deeper confession where you might actually feel like more open with the priest, like, unfortunately, like, I have a history of sexual assault. So, like, how do I talk about that, in detail with a man? I find that really difficult. So, like, this is one of the points in which, and I'm not going to pretend I'm a theologian, so I don't know or understand everything. It is something I'm trying to learn more about, but, like, that I kind of struggle with in terms of the fact that we do not ordain women.
Another thing that didn't cross my mind until just now is, once upon a time, I was in a domestic violence situation. And if you're married in the Catholic Church and in a domestic violence situation, you're going to approach priests who say, suck it up, buttercup. And I'm sorry, but like, there is no excuse for that. And I actually had to have another priest tell me, no, you have grounds for an annulment because this was violence. I am a therapist and I had to have another priest tell me, look, I hate to tell you this, but the full picture of this situation is grounds for annulment. And I don't know how many women in the church are enduring because they came across a misogynist in the confessional.
This not, I'm going to pass it to John in just a second, but it's not something that I have very much expertise in, so I can't weigh in too much here. I have brought stories to bishops before. So a lot of people reach out to Theology for the Unwanted online and they share their stories bravely, by the way, because in very few cases have John and I met these individuals before and they're like pouring their hearts out to us. And so from, the work I had done with the church, I decided I was going to take some of these stories and share it with higher ups. What I've learned is that a lot of the rules of the church, if you will, focus on, anything sexual being within marriage, right? So already if you are unmarried or single or you encounter violence outside of marriage, there's already at least a half strike against you. And it can be scary for a lot of individuals to come to the priest. In some cases they feel obligated to be like, hey, I got assaulted, but I wasn't married, and so I'm learning that it's much more complicated than I ever could have imagined. My hope is that as these stories bubble up, that the church, and it takes a long time for these things to bubble up to the top, but that the church kind of figures out that we haven't quite met the moment. So anyway, I appreciate both of you sharing that because people have written into Theology for the Unwanted, and it has kind of made me think, okay, we're not as prepared for this as we thought we were.
Yeah, and first, before I want to say what I was going to say, Nicole, Megan, as a guy, I will never be able to ever understand that feeling of fear that a woman would have going into a confession, wanting to talk about that. So the only thing I could say is I am incredibly sorry that you both experienced that in your life, and I really hope people can take a moment to really understand that sometimes we don't have to try to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, but we just need to show empathy. So the biggest thing here is on the flip side of this for guys going to confession. I've mentioned this on a previous episode. Is I had a confession that I went to, and one of the things I was confessing to was lust. I mentioned that there was this person walking by, and my mind did that thing that a younger guy's mind tends to do. And I felt bad about it. And I went to confession and I confessed it. And the priest then took 5 minutes, and it felt like he was justifying my mind doing that. The fact that I allowed my thoughts to get the better of me in that moment. And he was like, oh, that's normal. You see all the time on TV, the whole thing of like a beautiful girl walking by a construction site and the construction workers whistle. I'm just like,
it was like a boys will be boys kind of thing.
Exactly. And I'm like, Father, that's not what I need to hear. That's wrong. Like that is not like, are you justifying?
Having been whistled at by construction workers, I don't think we need to excuse that behavior.
Exactly. But the fact that he essentially tried to justify it as a boys would be boys kind of thing is atrocious.
Thank you. Like, John, for sharing.
Yeah.
It's because it's very validating to us ladies listening in.
We have come so far, and you've both have mentioned this when it comes to women's rights and the fight for equality overall, that any opportunity where a young male is in a teachable moment, I think it's an older male's responsibility to say, hey, look, I understand what happened. I've been there before. We need to do better. As men, we need to do better. And as a religious figure, if you are a priest in a confessional, I feel like religion plays a huge role in this. Religion needs to do better. And it needs to be done in a way that isn't justifying the behavior, but it needs to be as a teaching moment.
Did
right?
anyone here feel like that topic was addressed in the article? So again, knowing that this article is kind of like the background of what the Vatican's thinking, did anyone feel like that mark was made? No.
No.
Okay. So Megan, Nicole, what about what the church is currently thinking about this generational divide do you think they need to start taking into more consideration?
I think I can actually tie it back to what we were just talking about. So one of the things that I do want to bring up is that Meg kind of mentioned, I don't know if this was before we start recording, but Meg kind of mentioned at one point red pilling. So we've brought up the manosphere before, but I actually think, because, right, we see it in the stats, it's largely young Gen Z men coming back to church, right? And, you've mentioned that they're coming back because they want to find dates and stuff like that because they're socially awkward on the apps and things like that. But it's not only that, it's that they have way more traditionally patriarchal conservative values than Gen Z women do. So their idea is that if I can meet a girl at church, she's going to be more conservative. So there is this tie-in, right? And this is something that deeply concerns me because I feel like we're just moving forward as the church. I don't want to see a backslide in these areas. And so I think, Nick Fuentes comes to mind.
Oh boy, is he Catholic?
He is Catholic.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So, and there's different levels of these kind of like podcasters and male influencers out there that are overly traditional. And to me, it actually reads more as like Christian nationalist, evangelical kind of values that are coming into the Catholic Church rather than actually Catholic values. Not that I'm an expert, but that's how it seems to me. So I do think that this is not addressed in that article, that there is this kind of like very conservative push, especially for young men. And I think a lot of the reason that they fall into these traps is because they're not getting their social needs met in other ways.
Is there anything we can look at from this resurgence of traditionalism where we can be like, you know what? Like, I would like to see that come back.
Well, I think like coming back to church is a good thing. And I think seeking connection in person versus online would be very helpful. Like, and maybe actually, I don't know, spending time with women in real life might be helpful. Like seeing that we're real human beings and not just objects. So that's great. So I think that those things, I also think that, so I recently read a book. It's written by a Protestant, but it's, The Making of Biblical Womanhood. Very interesting. Talks about like the shift in between medieval times to like Reformation period, Enlightenment times of like women used to be seen, first of all, as like deformed men. And we were also the seductresses in medieval times. And you see this in like a lot of homilies and things like that, because she obviously goes back to Catholic thought, right? Because that's what it was in medieval times. So super interesting. But the shift, when you had this shift towards the family as being like the main like vector of God's goodness, right? We think of that in the Catholic Church, but this comes from the Reformation, because before that, like women who became nuns or who stayed virgins were seen as like shuffling off their femininity, their womanhood. And that's why you have people like Hildegard of Bingen and Catherine of Siena, who were taken very seriously by Catholic men. So like, sorry, I don't want to get into the whole thing of it, but it's just like a very interesting that like we have had such a shift in how women have been seen by the church, always under patriarchy, though we're never seen as equal.
No, I mean, even though I'm not there with you on ordination, everything that you just said historically is accurate. That is, I mean, that was the reasoning. If you were just kind of ask your average Catholic in the 13th century, that's pretty precisely what would have been said. Meg?
I very lovingly just want to say that I felt that this article was incredibly judgmental and like trying to stereotype, and that there was this on page 11, it's like judging the soft evangelization of Gen X. And like, it's like they're wanting to say, Ignacio, in my opinion here, is wanting to say like, this is Gen X's fault, rather than the church needs to hold some accountability here for their actions, for things falling apart, because there is nothing wrong, in my personal opinion, with soft evangelization. Personally, I think we need to figure out our own issues. We need to put the mask on ourselves before we think that we can go and evangelize to the world. Like, the reason that people were leaving was just earlier, we spoke on it, which was, my husband personally knew people that left the church because of abuse that hadn't even been addressed yet.
Mm-hmm. Her husband is Gen X, for clarity.
And So, it says, despite having done everything possible, they have generally failed to pass on the faith to subsequent generations as they would have liked. And I'm just like, why are you saying Gen X did this? Like, I had Life Teen. I don't know what y'all had, but what are you
Yeah.
talking about? Like, all of that stuff was there, but like, where does the culpability lie? I think that's really confusing the situation here. Like, if we're wanting to be a bridge, it really comes back. It doesn't matter, like generations, right? When we talk about building a bridge, we're talking about the fact that we need community. We need to know how to use healthy communication skills. Why aren't we teaching our churches healthy communication skills? And why aren't we creating scenarios where natural we used to make friends growing up because we sat side by side in class over and over and over again. It wasn't that we would have everything in common. And now it's like, you want to use an app for that? That's not how friendship is built. Anthropologically speaking, we don't work like that. And the church
Even though me and Meg became friends.
Oh yeah, that is that.
Yeah, I was wondering if the irony alarm was going off in your head as you said that, because you told us that you met on Bumble BFF, right?
We did,
Which-
and
Yeah.
and then book club. Yeah.
And then book club.
If you don't know, that is like the friendship side of Bumble, not the dating
The actual
side.
friendship. It's not like a wink and nod thing. It's actual
No,
like,
it's
hey,
actual friendship. Yeah.
The issue that I think Gen X gets blamed for when it comes to youth groups here, I think it's a uniquely Catholic problem. And I say that because the Protestants have youth groups figured out to a T. To this day, you go to any public school, there is Young Life. There is some kind of fellowship of Christian athletes. There is every single non-denominational, I would argue, out of the over 33,000 Protestant denominations in the United States alone, a good majority of them have some kind of influence in public schools when it comes to outreach to kids, when it comes to outreach to their faith communities also. And it's strong. You take a look at Gen Z kids in Protestant churches. They're active. They're active in these groups. Why are they not active in the Catholic Church? Why is it that Gen Z is rejecting the idea of social circles within the church group, within their faith life? They reject that in favor of wanting to be able to debate their faith. They want to be able to prove through words, when in reality, what Christianity, what Jesus calls us to do is faith would provide works. Like, your faith would result in works, which is very anti-Lutheranism. There's their faith alone. You don't got to do anything. You're saved or you're not, kind of thing. So, it blows my mind that we're going to dismiss the idea of youth groups and the success that youth groups have had in the Protestant realm of Christianity. And just because it didn't work out so well in Catholicism, I think that's purely a Catholic problem and not a Gen X problem. I think that's a problem that millennials have, and even Gen Z still have, whether millennials or Gen Z wanted to do it or not.
I was a youth pastor in Portland. I was a youth pastor assistant, and our group grew so fast. It was just, I don't have words for how many kids are actually currently in this program. And, I think what I might say is that it really depends on who is there. It really depends on who is there for the kids and how much support are you getting from your bishop? How much support are you getting from your people?
I think the biggest issue that we didn't touch on, and I know it's beating a dead horse, but I feel like it still needs to get brought up all the time. One big reason why youth groups in Catholic churches do not work is because of the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church itself. You have a lot of Gen X parents who do not want their kids to be in a youth group in a church. I understand it's not just a Catholic problem. There's a lot of Protestant denominations out there as well that have the same issue, but that definitely plays a huge, huge role. And it was just like the other day we were talking about this, Dan, about the report out of France.
Yeah.
It was like 300,000
victims.
And that was an accepted number. And it was probably
the
more.
The church agreed with that number.
And that was France alone. And
so
if
in reality, it's in the millions.
If you're a parent
worldwide,
and you want to raise your kid in the faith, and these reports keep constantly coming out, I don't blame parents for thinking twice about wanting to get their kids involved.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys feel similarly, but so I'm involved in like more than a dozen things with the church. And the one thing I won't do is youth ministry, not because I don't think it's like super necessary. I don't want to be accused. I don't want to have to like accidentally work with somebody that I think is wonderful. And then I find out that maybe they're not so wonderful. I'm so afraid of that I sidestep it altogether. And that's probably not to the service of our community, but I don't have the answer to that and I don't want to step in it. So, you know,
Sorry. I think that actually just has a lot to do with the fact that you're a man. Because I don't think, generally speaking, women, we feel like we're going to be accused of abuse as easily. I'm not saying we don't commit abuse, because we do. But like I wouldn't say I've never once worried, like, in my nonprofit work, which I've done nonprofit work with Catholic organizations, always been very adherent to the rule of there being at least 2 adults present.
sure.
So I think that that's been important. But like for me, like I love working with youth, but that's always been something I felt like called to do. I'm not really currently doing it, but I really love working with youth. But I think that like this is something we typically think of men as being abusers in our culture. It's not that women aren't, although statistically speaking, there's a higher chance that it was a man, but that might be also just how statistics are skewed. So I feel like that probably has a lot of part to do with it. And then also on top of that, you have a sexual orientation that has been accused over and over again without evidence of being abusers, right? So I definitely think that like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can say like, no, that's not it at all. But that to me is what I would think might be the difference. Have you ever worried about that? Like besides like a cursory, like I said, I did consider like, okay, there's 2 adults around. Have you ever worried that you might be accused?
I would say yes. I actually don't work with children in the South because I am so far left and liberal, I assume that I will be immediately, and I didn't feel that way in the Pacific Northwest at all. So yeah, I actually understand where Dan's coming from completely. And I think it's really sad. But I was also going to mention this. My mom was a helicopter parent. And I think that was another reason why I had such an amazing experience in Life Teen. And the parish where I was at, the parents were so involved, y'all. They were there all the time. They were making food for the kids. Like, so I think it also just had to do with like families valued being involved and at church. And they were having fun with one another. The adults had their own little crowd, but like they were also right there. So like if the kids needed anything, we all had training per the Catholic Church about, the rules. And so like we followed all the same rules that you're talking about, Nicole, of like there was never, just one person. Yeah.
Yeah. Usually it's called virtues. It depends on your diocese. In Cincinnati, they call it safe children or something
Right.
like that. But
It's complicated, right? Because we've just spent about an hour now talking about, okay, what's good and what's bad about the upcoming generation. And then none of us in here are currently working with the youth. I mean, like, and it's that.
To be fair, though, me and Meg do have experience working
Yes.
with you.
Well, and I taught the catechism for, what do we call it? The confirmation class, the cresima in Italian. I taught that for 5 years. And
I just had more like, I lived in Barcelona vibes.
Barcelona, yeah. Well, hey, my parish, we don't speak English most of the time, so
that's
hey,
fair. That's fair.
No, but it wasn't until what is his name, Cardinal McCarrick in 2018, when we found out that our bishop was like our cardinal was like the problem, right? Like he had made it to the very, very top, almost to the top of the Vatican, and he was the problem. And not to mention, whenever he would visit a parish, like every third male that would come up to shake his hand after, he'd be like, you are called to the priesthood. And a lot of times the guys would be like, what do you do when a cardinal says you're called to this? Like a representative and ambassador of God is telling you this, you take it seriously, right? So after that, I bowed out. I was like, no, thank you. I don't want to find out that I'm working with somebody. I don't want to be accidentally enabling them because I'm, an idiot and missing obvious signs. I just don't want to be anywhere near it. So it's complicated because here we are talking about Gen Z. And I was literally like, sorry, guys, I can't afford my reputation to help you become good Christians. So I think I'm trying to grapple with how complicated it is. I think there's a lot of bad, there's a lot of good. I think the Vatican has not quite met the mark yet, and at least how they're thinking about it. Since they gave us this article, we're going to wrap up here in just a minute. I'm going to give everyone an opportunity. Since they published this article in La Civiltà Cattolica, that means that they are kind of trying to take the temperature. So I'll start with you, Jon. After reading this, assuming this episode somehow magically makes it to the Vatican staff, what is it that you would want them to know? Like, what is it that, hey guys, you're thinking about the right thing, or you've totally forgotten about this, or you're not being totally honest about how big of a problem X is? Like, what would you say?
I think the biggest thing that they need to take away from this is that, you know, if they're going to identify that Gen Z is coming back to the church, they need to be proactive in taking steps to ensure that they're being catechized correctly. I think that's one of my biggest gripes on Catholicism in general, especially as a convert, is the religious education is lacking. When you take the temperature of anyone, not anyone, but a majority of people that go to mass, most of them don't actually understand the full thing. An example that I hate bringing up is my niece's religious education teacher told her this was just a handful of years ago that if someone dies by suicide, they are doomed to hell immediately. That's actually incorrect. We need to have people that are going to be correcting poor religious education on the next generation. That's the reason, one of the biggest reasons why we're seeing an uptick in some of these bad traditional values that are socially incorrect and religiously incorrect, like people using that passage about women needing to be subservient to their husband. That is an incorrect use of that passage, and there is theology to back that up. We need to push back at bad religious education to avoid repeating the sins of the past. It's as simple as that. Well, what's that old saying? Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. It's the same thing in religion. If you cannot educate the next generation coming into the pews, coming in through the doors, coming to Jesus, you're going to repeat the same issues in a vicious, vicious cycle.
100%. Totally agree with you, Jon. I guess it's me now. Yeah, if this was to get to the Vatican, I think it's what I said at the beginning. Like, you need to take into account groups of people that left. And because I don't think it's a small amount, especially among millennials, I think that, and younger Gen X, I think that a lot of us left because we saw people being mistreated. And despite the arguments for why that was okay within the church, we didn't agree with it. And like, very luckily, I realized that that's not the only thing to Catholicism. I have since had some better catechesis on such issues, even though I think overall I probably had a better catechesis than a lot of people because my dad actually likes the religious stuff. And that was not going to Catholic school. I went to public school. So I do think that is something that really needs to be thought of. I think the role of women, which not super thrilled with the documents. I haven't read through all of them that came out recently about women either. I think we still really haven't addressed things fully there. But so I do think that these things need to be thought of better. I think if we're not going to ordain women, we really need to think about what it's like for women to go into confession. And I would also like to point out that if you have been sexually assaulted, going into a small private room with a man might not feel that safe to you. This isn't me particularly, but I think that some women might struggle with that as well. So like, if you're asking somebody to put themselves in a situation that might trigger PTSD, they're not going to do it.
I think I only know that because people have written in to share that. And so that's why Jon and I repeat ad nauseum, share your stories. They matter for the church because people are generally not thinking about these things unless they're told why they have to.
So I have no idea why the Vatican would put the class of Woodstock 1999 in charge of being a bridge of anything. I need people that are trained in healthy communication patterns, like Dr. John and Julie Gottman from Seattle, okay? Like, I need those people teaching our church how to communicate and build safe spaces. I don't I don't need our wily crew to suddenly be slopped on and told that we are responsible. We don't know, okay? Like, unless we've been to therapy, we haven't figured it out yet. And so I just want to add that that's a lot of responsibility on a generation when the truth is that we function best in intergenerational groups. And that has been proven time and time and time again. So the entire premise of this writing, and I would just like to point out before we close that this man, this author, referenced himself twice. And actually, six of these were just like random quote. They were just like sentences. They weren't even like official references. So maybe at best, he could have had 16 appropriate bibliography references. And I just really struggled with that.
When they go to update the article, perhaps they'll decide that they need to cite you guys.
Please don't put that kind of pressure on us. Can I just say, in conjunction with the whole idea of like them putting all the pressure on millennials, they spent like 2 seconds talking about what millennials were like in the article.
Yeah, we were just a bridge, really, right?
Well, not only were we a bridge, but I believe, I can't remember if it was Megan or Nicole who said it, but like, we now know what Gen X feels like to be forgotten about from this article. Cause like they mentioned that, oh, there's this beautiful bridge called millennials, and they completely forgot about us, which honestly, millennial trauma here, at least we're not being blamed for it. So I take that as a win.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't millennials that destroyed the Catholic Church. It was Gen X.
Yeah, there we go. Gen X's problem.
Like cars and fabric softener, which is gross anyway. I'm so happy we destroyed fabric softener.
Oh man, so I have an idea of what sound bites we're going to clip for this. But listen, when the church decides to publish something in this journal, they are seeking the opinions. They're trying to take everybody's temperature. And normally, they assume that only PhDs are going to read. I'm not a PhD.
I have a master's.
And I think it's really important that we all, yeah, I know, and an associates of pastry.
Pastry, absolutely.
So I think it's really important to bring all of our voices to that table and make sure that the church is really trying to think this out a little bit more before we go further. Meg, did you have any other thoughts you wanted to share?
If we're closing, I just want to say a huge thank you. I want to say a huge thank you to you, Dan, and to you, Jon, because your podcast has absolutely just been a light shining in the church. And it was funny because I was on my drive over here, and one of the things I'll do to like calm myself or get in the zone is listen to hymns. And so the Christ Be Our Light was the song that came on when I was over here, and I was belting it. And it just, there's a line in there and it says, make us your living voice. And I feel like the two of you have been the living voices in this church. And I love you guys both. And yeah, that's it.
Just so that your heads don't get too big, I do want to let you know that we are still cooler than you.
Oh, yeah.
No, 100% true.
No, I'm just kidding. I would also like to say thank you. I was really excited when you invited us to come on here. It's
honored.
Like, this is our first time interviewing on another podcast, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And I'm such a huge fan.
Remind everyone where to find your podcast.
So you can find us on most major like podcast providers. Like we're on Spotify and Apple and everything. The podcast is Catholic, Not Fascist. And you can find us on basically every social media platform under that name as well.
I love it, guys. I think, we obviously have a lot of agreement kind of like as a baseline starting these conversations, but we also diverge in a lot, I think. And this is an important model that we need to give Catholics right now who may just kind of be going into their bubbles. Get out there and learn what's going on in the Catholic Church in Kentucky and Canada and Bolivia, because if we're a universal church, we got to act like it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just want to say, thank you both for the kind words. It's crazy to think that what started as Dan's brainchild here with this book and him coming to me asking me if I wanted to do this podcast with him is the fact that we're reaching so many people. I think is probably one of the coolest things ever, that we're even playing a small role in anyone in their journey around the sun, their journey in their faith life. I think it's really cool. I think it's really a really cool honor to even play a little role in anything for anyone else. So just thank you both. That was really cool. And I will completely concede you are both way cooler than Dan and I. It's not even close.
It's the confidence. It's the laughter.
It is.
I lived in 39 places.
It's my cool fact was I grew up in Korea, and now it's like, yeah, I'm just an everyday Joe Schmo, and that's completely cool.
I love the fire out of you, John. No, you're super cool.
In the course of my work, because I've worked a lot in like international kind of areas in some point, I've met people who have been to like 34 countries, and I'm like,
I wish.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to go to 34 countries.
Me too.
This episode, I think, is Exhibit A and why your stories matter. So now I'm talking to anyone that's listening. And, John and I were two dudes. We aren't mental health experts, but we listen to your stories, and we're grateful that you reach out and share with us. And we try and take these voices to the church as best as we can. No promises, of course, but we want to make sure that everyone feels heard, because the church, in order to discern seriously, needs to know what's going on concretely in your life. Otherwise, faith is just some abstract ideal. And now you have two more friends that you can reach out to. You can flood their DMs, I think.
You can. Yeah.
Okay. On Instagram, remind me the handle. Is it Catholic Not Fascist?
It is, yeah.
Okay. So you have Meg and Nicole, very different from me and John, but at the same time, we are all trying to get the church to a good, healthy place.
Healthy place, yes.
Exactly.
I think that's key, yeah.
So I am so grateful to both of you for your time tonight. I'm grateful to everyone that took a moment to listen. Let us know what you think. John and I will be waiting for your emails. Until next time, talk to you soon.